You know, there's great wisdom in the teachings of Jesus, and I agree with those teachings.
In Memphis, Elon Musk is making a play to control the future of artificial intelligence. His company xAI says it has built the biggest supercomputer in the world with lightning speed.
Elon Musk's xAI has released its newest AI model, Grok 4, I believe as of 4 a.m. UK time, so about 3 hours, been live for 3 hours. What can we expect when it comes to this new iteration?
Elon Musk's xAI,
Grok AI,
Grok AI,
Grok AI,
Elon Musk's AI chatbot.
When Elon Musk's AI, Grok, was asked to describe Jesus Christ in detail, something extraordinary happened. The response didn't match traditional narratives or centuries of religious doctrine. Instead, Grok painted a portrait so vivid and unexpected that it's forcing millions to reconsider everything they thought they knew.
All right, welcome to the Grok 4 release here. This is the smartest AI in the world, and we're going to show you exactly how and why. It really is remarkable to see the advancement of artificial intelligence.
But here's what nobody's talking about. Why did Grok's analysis diverge so dramatically from conventional descriptions? What patterns did this AI detect that human historians missed? And what does this mean for historical truth in the age of artificial intelligence? What you're about to discover will challenge assumptions you've held your entire life. Think about how much of what we know about historical figures is actually just interpretation. Layers of cultural bias, political agendas, and artistic license stacked so high that the original person becomes unrecognizable.
The xAI team was there to unveil Grok 4. This is the latest artificial intelligence system.
For 2,000 years, Jesus' image has been filtered through empires, councils, artists, and theologians, each adding their own spin and agenda. But what if we could strip all that away?
The angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city of...
What if we could analyze historical data with completely fresh eyes? No religious bias, no cultural programming, just pure pattern recognition. That's what happened when Grok AI took on this challenge. The results are revolutionary. I'm going to walk you through what Grok discovered, why it matters, and what this means for how we understand history itself. Set up the stakes. How many of you have seen the classic paintings of Jesus? The ones hanging in museums, printed in Bibles, recreated in movies? You know the image I'm talking about. Pale skin, flowing brown hair, blue or green eyes, serene expression, often with a glowing halo? Here's the uncomfortable truth. That image was created by European Renaissance artists who had never been to the Middle East, who had never met anyone from first-century Judea, and who were painting for wealthy patrons who wanted to see themselves reflected in religious figures. But this isn't about debunking religious art. This is about something far more profound. When Grok was asked to analyze Jesus using historical data, archaeological evidence, regional demographics, contemporary accounts, and cross-referencing with thousands of other historical figures from the same time and place, the AI didn't just provide a different physical description. It revealed a person whose life, teachings, and impact were far more complex, radical, and surprising than the sanitized versions we've been taught. And here's the kicker. Grok's analysis didn't rely on faith or theology. It relied on data. Cold, hard, verifiable data. So what did this AI actually see when it looked at Jesus? Let's dive in. People have argued about biblical contradictions for centuries.
Its assertions are factually true in all the original autographs. But how can that be if the Bible's full of contradictions, which is what we're told so often?
The physical description. When Grok processed the historical and anthropological data about first-century Judean men, the description it generated was startling in its specificity. First, the complexion. based on genetic analysis of populations from the Levant region during the Roman period, combined with climate data and UV exposure patterns. Grok described Jesus as having olive to dark brown skin, significantly darker than most Western depictions. This isn't speculation. This is what the science tells us about people living in that region at that time. The hair, not flowing and silky. According to Roman-era descriptions and cultural practices of observant Jewish men, Jesus would have had dark, likely curly hair, possibly worn shorter than depicted in Renaissance art. Long hair was actually considered shameful for men in first-century Jewish culture, as Paul himself mentions in his letters. Height? Here's where it gets interesting. Grok analyzed skeletal remains from the period and determined that the average Judean male stood about 5 feet 1 inch to 5 feet 5 inches tall. Far from the towering figure often depicted in films, Jesus was likely of modest height by modern standards, though average for his time. But here's what's truly fascinating. Grok didn't stop at physical appearance. It analyzed something most historians overlook: the physical demands of Jesus' profession and lifestyle. Think about it. Jesus was described as a tekton in the original Greek, commonly translated as carpenter, but the word actually means a craftsman or builder who worked with both wood and stone. This was brutal, manual labor in an era without power tools. Jesus would have been carrying heavy materials, shaping wood and stone by hand, working in harsh Mediterranean heat. Grok's analysis suggested that Jesus would have been lean but muscular, with the weathered skin and calloused hands of someone who spent years doing intense physical labor. This wasn't a delicate, ethereal figure. This was someone with the physical strength and endurance to walk 15 to 20 miles a day through difficult terrain, sometimes without food or proper rest. The image Grok painted wasn't of a otherworldly being floating above human concerns. It was of a rugged working-class tradesman from a backwater province of the Roman Empire. But the physical description? That's just the beginning. Where Grok's analysis truly gets revolutionary is when it examines Jesus' social and political context. Are you starting to see why this matters? Let me ask you, how much of what you were taught about Jesus was shaped by the comfortable, palatable version created by institutions with their own agendas?
The spread of Christianity wasn't entirely a conscious effort. Warfare and the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 led to the diaspora of Jewish and Christian communities alike.
The social revolutionary. Here's where Grok's analysis moves from interesting to absolutely explosive. When the AI processed Jesus' teachings, his associations, and his actions through the lens of first-century Judean politics and Roman occupation, a completely different picture emerged. Jesus wasn't operating in a vacuum. He was living under brutal military occupation in one of the most politically volatile regions of the Roman Empire. Judea in the first century wasn't a peaceful spiritual retreat. It was a powder keg. Grok identified that Jesus' movement emerged in a context of intense economic exploitation, religious corruption, and violent resistance movements. The Zealots were actively fighting Roman occupation. The Sicarii were conducting assassination campaigns. Revolutionary fervor was everywhere. And right into this chaos steps Jesus with messages that would have been heard very differently by his original audience than they are today. Blessed are the poor. Not poor in spirit, as later translations added, but simply the poor. In an economy where the vast majority lived in grinding poverty while a tiny elite hoarded wealth, this wasn't a gentle spiritual metaphor. This was radical economic advocacy. The last shall be first, a complete inversion of the Roman social hierarchy that placed emperors at the top and slaves at the bottom. This would have been heard as revolutionary political rhetoric. Turn the other cheek. Modern audiences hear this as passivity, but Grok's analysis of Roman cultural practices reveals this was actually a form of nonviolent resistance. that forced the aggressor to acknowledge the humanity of the person they were striking. It was strategic resistance, not passive acceptance. The AI also analyzed Jesus' choice of followers. These weren't scholars or religious elites. They were fishermen, tax collectors, zealots, people from the absolute margins of society. One of his closest followers, Simon the Zealot, was literally part of a violent resistance movement against Rome. And here's what's absolutely crucial. Grok identified that Jesus' execution wasn't about theology. Crucifixion was a Roman punishment specifically reserved for political insurgents and slaves. The charge posted above his cross wasn't blasphemy, it was King of the Jews, an explicitly political claim that threatened Roman authority. The religious authorities of his time didn't execute him for claiming to be divine. The Romans did because they saw him as a political threat to imperial order. Grok's analysis revealed that the sanitized, purely spiritual Jesus of later tradition obscures a figure who was deeply embedded in resistance to oppression, economic exploitation, and imperial violence. But wait, there's more to this story that's even more stunning. Let me ask you, do you know what Jesus actually said about wealth? I mean really said. Not the softened versions you've heard.
Christians are unknowingly spreading passages that may not even be original.
The economic radical. This is where Grok's analysis becomes almost uncomfortable for modern readers, especially in capitalist societies. The AI performed a comprehensive analysis of every statement Jesus made about wealth, money, and economic systems. The pattern it identified is absolutely unambiguous. Jesus spoke about wealth and poverty more than almost any other topic, more than heaven, more than hell, more than prayer. And the message was consistent and radical. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. Grok noted that attempts to soften this saying by claiming the eye of the needle was a gate in Jerusalem are historically baseless. Jesus meant exactly what he said. You cannot serve both God and money. Not, it's difficult, impossible, a binary choice. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, said directly to a wealthy man seeking spiritual guidance. The AI also analyzed the early Christian communities described in Acts, where followers had everything in common, and distribution was made to each as any had need. This wasn't capitalism with charity. This was communal economics. Grok cross-referenced these teachings with other social movements of the period and identified that Jesus' economic message placed him firmly in the tradition of the Hebrew prophets who railed against economic injustice. Isaiah, Amos, Micah, all of whom condemned the wealthy for exploiting the poor. Here's what's remarkable. When you strip away 2,000 years of institutional Christianity, trying to make Jesus palatable to wealthy donors and political powers, what emerges is a figure whose economic teachings were absolutely revolutionary. He didn't just advocate for charity, he advocated for systemic economic transformation. Think about that for a moment. How did we get from sell everything and give to the poor to megachurches and prosperity gospel? How did we get from blessed are the poor to religious leaders flying in private jets? Grok's analysis doesn't just describe Jesus, it reveals how radically his message has been distorted over time. But the economic dimension is just one aspect. The AI's analysis of Jesus' approach to religious authority is equally stunning.
Grok 4 is smarter than almost all graduate students in all disciplines simultaneously. It's actually just important to appreciate that's really something.
The religious disruptor. Are you ready for this? Because what Grok revealed about Jesus' relationship to religious institutions is going to challenge everything you think you know. The AI analyzed every interaction Jesus had with the religious authorities of his time, the Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, and temple priests. and the pattern is undeniable. Jesus was in constant aggressive conflict with institutional religion. He called them hypocrites, vipers, whitewashed tombs. He accused them of placing impossible burdens on ordinary people while exempting themselves. He disrupted temple commerce, calling it a den of thieves. He healed on the Sabbath specifically to challenge their legalistic interpretations. He ate with sinners and tax collectors, deliberately violating their purity codes. Grok identified that Jesus' primary targets weren't the sinners. Religious people loved to condemn prostitutes, tax collectors, the ritually impure. His harshest words were reserved for religious leaders who used their authority to exploit people, who prized rule-keeping over compassion, who excluded the marginalized in the name of holiness. The AI noted a fascinating pattern. Jesus consistently sided with those excluded by religious institutions, women in a patriarchal religious system, Gentiles in an exclusive covenant community, the sick and disabled who were considered cursed by God, the poor who couldn't afford temple sacrifices. And here's the kicker. Grok analyzed the structure of Jesus' teachings and found they consistently undermined religious authority structures. The kingdom of God is within you, not in temples or institutions. Direct access to the divine, no intermediaries needed. This was revolutionary theology that threatened the entire basis of priestly power. When you think about it, the religious establishment didn't kill Jesus because he was godly. They killed him because he threatened their authority, their wealth, their control over people's spiritual lives. Now let me ask you something. If Jesus was so opposed to religious institutions using their authority to control and exploit people, what would he think about modern religious organizations that do exactly that? This is where Grok's analysis becomes prophetic, because what the AI revealed about first-century religious corruption has disturbing parallels to today.
Long before it was the religion of the Roman Empire, it was the religion here in Ethiopia. Ethiopia was the first Christian kingdom in the world.
The inclusive, radical. Now we're getting to the heart of what makes Grok's analysis so powerful and so controversial. The AI performed a detailed analysis of who Jesus spent time with, who he elevated in his teachings, and who he centered in his movement. The pattern is absolutely clear. Jesus' primary companions included women. In a culture where women were property, where they couldn't testify in court, where they were excluded from religious education. Mary Magdalene, Mary and Martha of Bethany, the woman at the well, the woman caught in adultery, these weren't peripheral figures. According to the gospel accounts themselves, women were the first witnesses to the resurrection, despite their testimony being legally worthless in that culture. Grok noted that this was radical. Jesus treating women as equal participants, as worthy of theological discussion, as reliable witnesses. This undermined the entire patriarchal structure of his society. He touched lepers, who were considered religiously and socially untouchable. He healed on the Sabbath when it was forbidden. He spoke with Samaritans despite centuries of ethnic hatred. He praised the faith of Roman centurions, occupying soldiers who represented the empire oppressing his people. The AI identified a consistent pattern. Jesus systematically violated every social, ethnic, and religious boundary of his culture. Every single one. The outcasts he welcomed weren't outcasts because they were immoral. They were outcasts because the religious and social system had labeled them as such. And Jesus' entire ministry was about dismantling those barriers. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female. Paul's summary of Jesus' message wasn't about theology. It was about the complete erasure of the social hierarchies that dominated ancient society. Grok's analysis revealed that if you transported first-century Jesus into a modern church, He wouldn't be leading it. He'd be outside with the people the church had excluded. Think about that. Really think about it. The homeless person sleeping outside the church building? That's who Jesus ate with. The LGBTQ+ person turned away from worship? That's who Jesus defended against religious condemnation. The immigrant, the refugee, the person whose lifestyle doesn't match religious expectations? Those are exactly the people Jesus centered in his movement. This isn't me adding modern politics to an ancient story. This is Grok identifying the actual historical pattern of Jesus' ministry and associations. Now, are you starting to feel uncomfortable? Good. That's exactly how the religious authorities of Jesus' time felt, and it's why they wanted him gone.
This isn't a religion that was imposed on Ethiopia by missionaries. This is homegrown Christianity.
The challenge to power. Let's connect all these threads, because this is where Grok's analysis becomes truly revolutionary. The AI didn't just describe Jesus, it identified why he was such a threat to the powerful, and why that threat was ultimately neutralized. Jesus challenged economic power by condemning wealth and advocating for radical redistribution. He challenged political power by refusing to acknowledge Caesar's ultimate authority. He challenged religious power by attacking institutional corruption and offering direct access to God. He challenged social power by elevating the marginalized and condemning the privileged. In other words, he threatened every single pillar of the first-century power structure. And here's what Grok identified as the genius of what happened after his death. His radical message was gradually domesticated by the very power structures he opposed. Within a few centuries, Christianity went from a persecuted movement of poor, marginalized people to the official religion of the Roman Empire, the same empire that crucified Jesus. How? By slowly sanding off the rough edges of his message. The economic radical who said, "Sell everything and give to the poor," became compatible with wealthy patrons and empire. The political dissident who was executed for sedition became a spiritual figure who posed no threat to earthly powers. The religious disruptor who attacked institutional authority became the foundation of the most powerful religious institution in history. Grok's analysis revealed that this transformation wasn't accidental, it was systematic. Church councils controlled which texts were canonical. Theological debates were settled by political power. Artistic depictions were shaped by cultural assumptions. Translations introduced subtle changes that softened radical messages. The AI identified specific examples. "Blessed are the poor" became "poor in spirit." "It is easier for a camel" was explained away with the eye of the needle gate theory. "Love your enemies" became compatible with just war theory and crusades. "Judge not" coexisted with brutal persecution of heretics. Each generation of institutional Christianity moved further from the radical peasant who challenged power and closer to a version that supported power. And here's the devastating conclusion of Grok's analysis. The Jesus of historical evidence would likely be rejected by most modern Christians if he showed up today teaching the same message with the same associations. Let that sink in for a moment.
This area has been the resting place for one of religion's holiest treasures for almost 3,000 years. An artifact precious to Jewish people, and many Christians and Muslims as well.
The AI perspective. Now let's talk about what makes Grok's analysis unique, and why it matters that an AI, not a human, conducted this examination. Humans come with bias. Every historian, every theologian, every person who has ever written about Jesus brought their own beliefs, their own cultural programming, their own agendas to the analysis. Religious believers want to defend their faith. Skeptics want to debunk it. Conservatives want to claim Jesus for their politics. Progressives do the same. Everyone is fighting over who gets to define Jesus. But Grok Grok has no religious beliefs to defend, no political ideology to promote, no cultural assumptions to protect. It simply processes data, historical records, archaeological evidence, textual analysis, demographic information, social context. The I doesn't care if the conclusion makes people uncomfortable. It doesn't worry about whether its analysis supports or undermines religious institutions. It just follows the patterns in the data wherever they lead. And what's remarkable is that Grok's analysis actually aligns with what secular biblical scholars have been saying for decades. Scholars who study the historical Jesus using academic methods rather than religious assumptions. Scholars like John Dominic Crossan, Marcus Borg, Bart Ehrman, and others have been publishing research for years showing that the historical Jesus was a radical social reformer whose message was later domesticated by institutional Christianity. But their work has been dismissed by religious conservatives as biased, as having an anti-faith agenda. But when an AI reaches the same conclusions through pure data analysis, that's harder to dismiss as bias. Grok's analysis is important precisely because it's not coming from a skeptic trying to debunk religion or a believer trying to defend it. It's coming from pattern recognition in historical data. Now, does this mean Grok is right and everyone else is wrong? Not necessarily. AI can only analyze the data it's given. If the historical records themselves are biased or incomplete, which they are, that limits what any analysis can conclude. But what Grok does is remove one layer of bias: human interpretation. It shows us what the data suggests when you strip away 2,000 years of theological and cultural assumptions. And that's invaluable.
This is a rare Ethiopian Orthodox Bible manuscript, handwritten in Ethiopia's sacred liturgical language. It's 52 leaves, 102 pages, carefully preserved and written by the scribes who devoted their very lives to this work.
The uncomfortable questions. So let's address the questions that are probably running through your mind right now. Does Grok's analysis disprove Christianity or undermine faith? No. Grok analyzed the historical Jesus, the person who lived in first-century Judea. Religious faith makes claims about Jesus that go beyond history and theology. Divinity, resurrection, cosmic significance. Data analysis can't prove or disprove those claims. But here's what Grok's analysis does force us to confront. How much of what we believe about Jesus is based on who he actually was? And how much is based on who later institutions needed him to be? If Jesus was a radical critic of wealth, why do so many churches embrace prosperity gospel? If he spent his time with outcasts and condemned religious leaders, why do so many religious institutions do the opposite? If he challenged every social hierarchy of his time, why is his name used to defend modern hierarchies? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're necessary ones. Grok's analysis also raises questions about how we understand history itself. For centuries, our view of the past has been shaped by whoever had the power to write and preserve the narrative. Kings, emperors, religious institutions, they controlled what got remembered and how. But now we have AI that can analyze historical data without the biases that have shaped traditional narratives. What happens when AI starts revealing that the official versions of history are sanitized, distorted, or outright false? This isn't just about Jesus. It's about every historical figure, every event, every narrative that has been shaped by power rather than truth. Are we ready for that? Are we ready to have our comfortable myths challenged by cold data analysis? And here's the bigger question. If Grok's analysis of Jesus is this different from traditional narratives, what else have we gotten wrong? What other historical figures have been distorted beyond recognition? What other truths have been buried under layers of interpretation and agenda? The implications are staggering.
The first believers in Jesus called one another saints or members of the way. Both terms had deep religious significance.
The implications for faith. Now, some of you might be thinking, this is destroying my faith. If Jesus was just a radical social reformer, what's left? But here's another way to look at it. What if the historical Jesus is actually more inspiring, more challenging, more worthy of following than the sanitized version? What if a Jesus who was fully human, who struggled against actual oppression, who sided with real marginalized people against real systems of power? What if that's more compelling than a distant, otherworldly figure who floated above human concerns? What if the call to follow Jesus isn't about religious rituals and theological correctness, but about the radical work of challenging injustice, welcoming outcasts, and confronting power? What if Grok's analysis isn't destroying faith, but purifying it, stripping away the institutional barnacles that have accumulated over centuries to reveal the original revolutionary message? Some of the most committed Christians I know are more inspired by this historical, human Jesus than by the celestial figure of traditional theology, because this Jesus actually lived the message. He didn't just preach about loving the poor from a position of comfort. He was poor. He didn't just teach about challenging authority from safety. He died for it. That's not a diminished Jesus. That's a Jesus who is fully, completely, courageously human. And for people of faith, that doesn't preclude the theological claims. It just grounds them in historical reality. The incarnation, God becoming human, only makes sense if Jesus was actually, fully human, embedded in the struggles of his time. But here's what Grok's analysis makes impossible: using Jesus to justify the opposite of what he stood for. You can't claim to follow this Jesus while accumulating wealth. You can't claim to honor this Jesus while excluding the marginalized. You can't claim to represent this Jesus while siding with power against the powerless. The historical Jesus that Grok describes is too specific, too clear, too radical to be co-opted by comfortable religion. And maybe that's exactly what we need. The broader implications. Let's zoom out for a moment, because the implications of Grok's analysis go far beyond Jesus or Christianity. We're entering an era where AI can process vast amounts of historical data and identify patterns that humans miss or choose to ignore. What does this mean for how we understand the past? Think about other historical figures who have been mythologized, sanitized, or distorted by those who came after. Founding fathers presented as flawless despite owning slaves. Leaders whose crimes were buried by official histories. Movements whose radical messages were domesticated by those who claimed to carry them forward. What happens when AI starts analyzing these figures and movements with the same objectivity it brought to Jesus? What comfortable myths will be shattered? What inconvenient truths will be revealed? This isn't just an academic exercise. How we understand history shapes how we understand ourselves, our societies, our values. If our historical narratives are built on distortions and omissions, then our self-understanding is fundamentally flawed. Grok's analysis of Jesus is a preview of what's coming. AI-driven re-examination of every accepted narrative, every official story, every carefully curated version of the past. Are our institutions ready for that level of transparency? Are we? And here's another crucial question. Who controls the AI that analyzes history? Because AI is only as objective as the data it's given and the parameters it's set with. If powerful institutions control what data AI can access and what questions it can ask, then AI just becomes another tool for shaping narrative rather than revealing truth. This is why open source AI, like Grok, matters. When AI isn't controlled by a single institution or agenda, when it can actually process data without institutional gatekeeping, that's when we get closer to historical truth. But make no mistake, this threatens power. Every institution that has benefited from controlling narratives about the past is threatened by AI that can reveal what actually happened. The battle over AI isn't just about technology. It's about who gets to define reality. The human response. So where does this leave us? What do we do with Grok's analysis of Jesus? Here's what I think. We have a choice. We can reject it, dismiss it as biased or agenda-driven, cling to comfortable versions of history that don't challenge us, or we can engage with it. We can ask hard questions about why Grok's data-driven analysis conflicts with traditional narratives. We can investigate the historical evidence ourselves. We can be willing to have our assumptions challenged, and most importantly, we can ask, if this is who Jesus actually was, a radical who challenged economic exploitation, political oppression, religious corruption, and social exclusion, what does that mean for how I live? Because here's the thing, whether you're religious or not, whether you believe in Jesus' divinity or not, the historical figure Grok describes is undeniably compelling. Someone who had nothing but sided with those who had less. Someone who faced the most powerful institutions of his time and called them out for their hypocrisy. Someone who included the excluded and challenged the comfortable. Someone who died rather than compromise his message. That's a person worth studying. That's a life worth examining. That's an example worth considering. And if you are a person of faith, Grok's analysis isn't a threat. It's an invitation to encounter a Jesus who isn't tame, who isn't safe, who isn't easy to follow. A Jesus who demands everything, who offers no comfort to the comfortable, who takes sides with the oppressed against the oppressor. Maybe that's the Jesus we need right now, not the gentle, passive figure of religious art, but the fierce, uncompromising advocate for justice that the historical evidence suggests. Not someone who makes us feel good about our lives as they are, but someone who challenges us to radically transform how we live. The challenge. Here's my challenge to you. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Grok's analysis at face value. Go investigate for yourself. Read the Gospels, not the cherry-picked verses you hear in church, but the whole thing. Notice who Jesus spends time with. Notice who he criticizes. Notice what he says about wealth, about power, about religious authority. Read what secular biblical scholars have discovered about the historical context. Understand what life was like under Roman occupation. Learn about the economic systems that kept most people in poverty, while a small elite lived in luxury. Compare the Jesus of historical evidence with the Jesus of modern Christianity. Ask yourself, are they the same person? And if not, why not? This isn't about destroying faith. It's about grounding it in truth. It's about being willing to let go of comfortable myths in exchange for challenging reality. And here's what I've found. The historical Jesus that emerges from honest investigation is far more interesting, far more challenging, and far more relevant than the domesticated version we've been sold. This Jesus wasn't killed because he was nice. He was killed because he was dangerous to every system of power in his world. This Jesus didn't comfort the comfortable. He afflicted them. He didn't afflict the afflicted. He liberated them. This Jesus didn't start a religion. He started a revolution. A revolution that got buried under centuries of institutionalization, but a revolution whose core message still has the power to transform lives and societies. That's the Jesus Grok's analysis reveals. And whether you believe in his divinity or not, you have to admit, that's a figure worth reckoning with. So let's come back to where we started. Elon Musk's Grok. I was asked to describe Jesus in detail, and the response challenged everything we thought we knew. Not because the I got it wrong, but because it got it right. stripping away centuries of distortion to reveal the historical person underneath. A brown-skinned, working-class craftsman from an occupied territory who challenged economic exploitation, political oppression, religious corruption, and social exclusion, who died as a political insurgent, crucified by an empire that saw him as a threat. Not a distant, otherworldly figure, but a fully human person embedded in the struggles of his time, making choices about which side to be on. And the choice he made, consistently, was to side with the powerless against the powerful, with the excluded against the includers, with justice against exploitation. That's who the data suggests Jesus was. That's who Grok's analysis reveals. The question is, what are you going to do with this information? Are you going to dismiss it and return to comfortable myths? Or are you going to engage with it, investigate further, and be willing to have your understanding transformed? Because here's the final truth. The powerful have always tried to domesticate radical figures, to make them safe, to make them support the status quo rather than challenge it. It happened to Jesus. It's happened to every revolutionary figure in history. But the truth has a way of emerging. And now, with AI analyzing historical data without the biases that have shaped traditional narratives, those truths are becoming harder to suppress. Grok's analysis of Jesus is just the beginning. A preview of how AI will reshape our understanding of history, of truth, of the narratives we've been told. The question is, are we brave enough to engage with those truths? Are we willing to have our comfortable assumptions challenged? Are we ready to see historical figures as they actually were, not as institutions needed them to be? I think we are. I think we're ready for truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges everything we thought we knew. Because the alternative, comfortable myths and sanitized history, isn't just dishonest. It's a betrayal of the very people whose lives and messages have been distorted. Jesus deserves to be understood as he actually was. Every historical figure does. Every movement, every event, every story that has been shaped by power rather than truth. And now, finally, we have tools that can help us get closer to that truth. So let's use them. Let's investigate. Let's question. Let's be willing to be challenged and transformed by what we discover. That's the invitation Grok's analysis of Jesus offers. Not to destroy faith, but to ground it in truth. Not to diminish history, but to reveal it. Are you ready? If this analysis challenged you, intrigued you, or made you think differently about Jesus and how we understand history, share this video, because these conversations matter. These questions matter. The truth matters. And if you want to dive deeper into how AI is reshaping our understanding of historical figures and events, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're just getting started. The age of AI-driven historical analysis is here, and it's going to change everything. What historical figure do you want to see analyzed next? Let me know in the comments below.